Perfect. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming along today. So, as I'm sure you're aware, this is our final panel in our speaker series in as a curtain-raising event for COP28, and this is a panel on entrepreneurship and climate innovation. So, to address the issues of climate change and grow past them, it is imperative to build the skills of youth innovators. You in the audience. You experience firsthand the effects of climate change and are best placed to address it. And you are a group that will also be most affected by it in the future. Immersed in these problems, you possess a unique perspective and therefore hold the greatest potential for generating innovative solutions that directly address the tangible effects of a changing climate. By empowering you young individuals with the skills necessary to act on your ideas, we can unlock an outsized impact for communities, nations, and even international levels. So today, our discussion will be centered around three key themes, being entrepreneurial skills development, identifying disruptive climate solutions, and then overcoming resource constraints and realizing your ideas. So we've already had a few people start and introduce themselves in the chat, but if everyone else who's just joined in could please just say hi, your name, where you're from, and yeah, maybe some of your background as well, so we can get to know a little bit more about you. And in the last 10 minutes or so of the panel, we will be having some Q&A. So if you could, any questions you might have or anything you want to kind of engage with the panelists for, please put that in the Q&A box, and we can get to that at the end. Now I'd like to start off by kind of asking our panelists to introduce yourselves. So if you could, so today we've got Vincent, Tom, and Mustapha. I will stop here and let you'll tell us the amazing things you've been up to, the work you've been doing. Vincent, if we could start with you, please.
How long do you want this intro to be?
Well, let's maybe if you can touch on maybe just a few minutes, if you can touch on your current work and your background and kind of your relation to climate sustainability and entrepreneurship.
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks for having me, James. My name is Vincent Fong. I'm calling in from Hong Kong right now. I split my time between Shanghai and Hong Kong. Around a year ago, I work with the largest LNG gas group provider in Hong Kong and also China. We've been, as a group, not only been providing gas all around our region, but also have been heavily involved in the green energy projects. So over the last 3 years, we've been putting solars over gigawatts of solar over China, storage to kind of provide green solutions. Now, while China has been taking a really good stance in terms of the government policies, now a lot of businesses are participating in kind of green projects. A huge missing base is kind of the consumer education when it comes to their day-to-day habits in being able to contribute to our more sustainable future. So we decided to create this project called Free R Labs. The free R is reuse, reduce, recycle. And the name labs meaning it's something that we're still experimenting, kind of finding a solution to integrate these free ideas into a lifestyle retail experiential center. So in short, what we do is we created this retail space where everything from start to finish, meaning from the construction, the use of material, everything is used from recycled materials to showcase the ability that even when you design a store and all the material used, you could have a more sustainable choice. This is kind of the foundation of the store. And then inside the store, every single product have a very rigorous selection of eco retail products. This cross the category from food to fashion to home goods, basically things we use on a day-to-day basis. So that's one. Two is also we have a little backyard area where we allow a lot of activities to happen mainly from secondhand markets to some ugly fruits transactions. So the whole idea is to make it very lively, both from the retail experience into the weekend activities, such that the general audience, without having a deep background in sustainability, can come into space as they would normally as a customer and user, and learn the process and the importance of sustainability in this place. And since then, we have had really good success from really big brands like Estee Lauder, into other retail brands that launched their clean product series specifically in our shop and debuting it. Because most of these brands have the issue where only a small portion of their brand products are sustainable. So it has to be a process. And what better place to do it than in a very eco-specific space? And we are one of a kind right now in China. And the goal is very simple, is to educate more people to adopt a sustainable lifestyle through practice and experiencing.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you. Yeah, Tom, please, would you like to go next?
Sure. So thanks, James, for having me, and I am extremely happy to be here. I'll talk a little bit about, I guess, what I do, similar to how Vincent's introduction went, but maybe talk a little bit more about my history, kind of on a personal level. So my very first job out of high school many years ago was working for Greenpeace, and I have been involved in the environmental movement for quite some time. So going on 30 years now. After moving through university and things like that, I worked in the media industry for a number of years as a freelance producer, freelance photojournalist, got to travel the world and see lots of different things. And then as the media industry started to transform, driven by technology mostly, I shifted into the technology business, which is what I do now as my day job, if you will. And I'll talk a little bit about that, as well as some of my efforts on education for students. But my day job is I'm a consulting principal for a company called Colt. Colt originally stood for City of London Telecom. So it's a company that's been around for quite some time. And if you happen to be walking around London and look down on the pavement, you'll see these little signs that say Colt, and that's what that means. And that's the kind of the infrastructure that powers the digital world. So combined with telecommunications networks, the other really big piece of that infrastructure is data centers and cloud computing services and other IT services that power all the things like what we're doing here with Zoom and social media and YouTube and you name it. And my focus is primarily on looking at both the positive impacts of technology services, lots of great things we could do. We didn't all have to get on a plane to get together to have this, which it was a great thing, but also the negative externalities and the fact that at this point, data centers consume more energy and have a greater carbon footprint than the airline industry. And they're growing at a much faster rate. So even though we don't think of it necessarily when we're using services like this, or when we're using social media or doing other things like that, the reality is our digital footprints are very significant portion of our overall impact on the planet. And one of my areas of focus is trying to raise people's awareness of, again, of both those positive impacts and the negative externalities, and what we can do to have more consciousness around that. And so in addition to that, being a part of my day job and consulting with big companies around how do they optimize their IT infrastructure, how do they make better use and eliminate data waste and those kind of things, I run an organization based in Amsterdam, where I live, called Aspire Institute, that's focused on sustainability education, primarily for students. So we bring students from the US, from the UK, from other parts of the world to the Netherlands and to Iceland for experiential learning programs, where we focus on sustainability education and really understanding kind of the big picture of sustainability, not just from environmental issues, but we also focus on things like social issues such as a just transition, and how a lot of the patterns, particularly economic patterns, that have put us in the situation we're in are actually legacies of the colonial era. And so how we need to change the way we handle governance, the way we run financial institutions like the World Bank and the World Economic Forum and other things like that, to really facilitate the kind of transition that we need to happen globally. And so I work with that organization, as well as with a number of other industry organizations, ones like the Sustainable Digital Infrastructure Association and others, to try to bring those two things together effectively, to use technology to try to drive the mission, and also to use education, and in particular the education of young people, to try to drive awareness, not so much necessarily on the personal level and personal behavior change, because while that's important, but really much more important is systems level change, and what we can do to find leverage points as individuals and as professionals to create systems level change, to magnify our own interest and our own impact in a way that accelerates the transformation in the way we need that to happen. So that's my primary areas of focus.
Amazing. The that intersection of like just decarbonization and digitalization is quite fascinating. I look forward to kind of unpacking that a bit more in the coming hour. Mustapha, thank you for joining us. Would you like to give a brief introduction as well?
Yes, I'd be very happy to do so. Thank you, James, for having me, and very pleased to meet you guys. I'm actually I'm now in Dubai, so at COP already, as you see. So we are
Fantastic.
We are gathering the business community starting from next Friday. So I can tell you how busy I am. So I'm very happy to come, but then I would not be able to stay the whole panel, unfortunately. So I spent 20 years in climate finance. So World Bank, UN early days, and in trying to de-risk investment. Because for one particular reason, that the finance gap actually to reach the 2-degree scenario is above $2 trillion on a yearly base. So the only way to do that, we can't do it with public money alone. We must unlock private capital. And to do that, we need to de-risk. So that's what we, and I have been trying to do in various capacities during the past years. Also now leading my own ventures, we have different kind of startups that we support on the green cloud infrastructure, for example, that we are trying to bring energy efficiency in such very energy intense economy where you know that AI economy will represent over 15 trillion by 2030. So there is no way we can support that economy without, we can't increase our energy ability. So we have to make it more energy efficient. So then renewable energy facilities also in Africa. So I'm Moroccan. So that's what I have been doing. I think the theme is entrepreneurship. I think one of the things that I try to advocate, we published an article recently that will be published ahead of COP about this with some of the big VC, US VC, tackling the climate tech. And the real thing is when you invest in a climate technology or a climate startup, investors should look at it differently in the sense that that impact that they are making need to be priced in terms of risk differently than when you invest in an e-commerce business that has a model that is not aimed to generate that positive externality. So one of the points that I would like to just share is like that de-risking that we have been able, even if it's the start, we have been able to do with the international community for infrastructure, which is renewable mainly. But now we need to do it also for the venture capital or early stage. That way we can help the best climate company to grow faster. So that's one of the key message I want to make. And the last thing that I want to say is the good thing about this COP that is upcoming is it really shows a very strong commitment of oil state country, really with a fantastic leadership. And they are really trying to provide action-oriented announcement that you are going to see starting from next Friday. And the last thing that I want to say is when you look back at the economy grow, GDP, the GDP has been always correlated to CO2, greenhouse gas emission. So, and that's the reason why we reach out to the Paris Agreement while the climate change is due to OECD countries and not developing countries. So then my point is we can't target similar GDP growth in the next 25 years without integrating that we will need to use fossil fuel. So it can't disappear. We can't claim on one side GDP growth and then say we then forget about fossil fuel in few years. We can't do that. We can do it over time. That's what I think, and increase the green energy and energy efficiency. And the point that made the first speaker on changing behavior of the consumer is really very important. But I just want to share last, when you see that the largest share of CO2 emission come from energy in any case. So if we solve that, then we are going to be solving a large part of, and then I will not keep the floor too long, but I think in terms of startups, the sectors that I see, energy storage, of course, which is green hydrogen derivatives, heating, you have geothermal technologies, among others that are really things that startups and innovation that I think will play a very important role. So thank you guys for James for having me, and happy guys also to connect.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really interested in your saying as you're talking about these new climate tech startups and this enhanced role of oil states, what the role of youth is in all that, and that's something we can drill down to in these coming questions. So in saying that, let's get into some of our next discussion points. So kind of starting off, I'd say if you could distill the essential entrepreneurial skills in these areas that you've all been discussing, from kind of changing, perhaps tackling the challenge of changing consumer behaviors, or like equitable decarbonizations, or whatever it may be, could you distill the entrepreneurial skills required to meet those challenges into, I guess, like 3 top ones, and why would you classify those as being the top 3?
Who do you want to start, James?
Tom, if you can start.
All right, I guess you ask and you shall receive, right?
Exactly.
I guess when it comes to entrepreneurial skills, so I started my career, as I mentioned, as a freelancer, and I worked entrepreneurially for more than a decade before I got into more of the corporate world. And then since being in tech and corporate, I work and mentor a lot of different startups. So my experience has been that quite often what brings people to want to be an entrepreneur and to start their own company is kind of a great skill around creative problem solving, right? Most of the people who want to go into the corporate world and get a job tend to want to, they see a systems that they want to be a part of, right? Where I think entrepreneurs tend to see a problem that needs to be solved, or they think they can solve. And I think developing that creative problem solving ability is really key for entrepreneurs. You can, as companies grow, you can bring in people who have different skill sets that are complementary to yours, whether it's people who run finance or do operations or do other kinds of business, right? And you should always be open to bringing in those skill sets. But that unique ability to solve problems creatively and to get other people motivated around those solutions, I think is probably the main thing that it takes to be an entrepreneur and to be successful. The second one for me that I think is really crucial in this particular realm where we're talking about climate tech is systems thinking, right? It's a discipline that we don't really teach very much at university level. It shows up in various places, but even in things like engineering, for example, we have not traditionally taught engineers systems thinking, which means that people go to engineering school and they learn how to engineer something, and they don't necessarily learn how to deal with the negative externalities of the thing they've just engineered. And that's part of the reason we're in the situation that we're in, is because engineers have been solving problems without considering the second order effects and the negative externalities associated with those solutions. When we started powering our heating our homes and powering our cars with fossil fuels. It didn't occur to us that, we were going to run out of runway, so to speak. So I think that systems thinking discipline is really, really key, and that shows up in a lot of different places. And then I think the third one in my mind is to really understand, and I think Mustapha touched on this a little bit, to understand kind of the role of economics, and in particular macroeconomic trends and influences, because startups tend to work in small ecosystems, right? You might work in a particular vertical market or an industry where the cool thing you've invented is going to transform a particular process or a company, or if you're lucky, maybe you'll transform a whole industry. But quite often we don't understand where the dependencies and the relationships are between that problem we're solving and other problems that other people are solving or need to have solved, or other problems that maybe we can't solve at this point. And to figure out how you can create synergies between the solutions that you're coming up with and what your business is going to do, and other areas that will give it real scale and real impact. And some of the solutions I think about, for example, Mustapha mentioned energy storage, right? So I'm working with a startup right now that is trying to integrate wind power with solar power in remote installations. And by combining a wind turbine underneath a solar panel, not only do you get two different types of energy at the same time, but the wind turbine helps to cool the solar panel and make it more efficient. So it's a really good example of how they bring these two technologies together actually helps both of them perform better and can improve you get rid of some of that intermittency associated with renewable power, where the sun's not always shining and the wind's not always blowing, but you put the two things together and you're more likely to have some energy coming out of that system. So those kinds of, bringing technologies, bringing people, bringing companies together, and your ability to kind of build coalitions and to find ways to connect with other people that are maybe not necessarily in your immediate circle of awareness or influence, and bring them to the party and try to get them to help you and to try to help them, I think is going to be key. We need a much more collaborative approach to business than I think we've traditionally had in a lot of countries. And part of the reason I moved from the US to the Netherlands is because the Netherlands is really a very, very collaborative place. And this goes all the way back to what's referred to as the polder system during the earliest portion of the Netherlands. Even when you had two groups that were fighting wars against each other, they had to cooperate to keep the whole country from being flooded, to keep the windmills going and the water from flooding the entire country. So you had groups that were literally fighting wars over territory and working together to keep them all from, dying. So you have this weird kind of mindset that exists not in very many other places, where collaboration is the key to survival. And I think that's a lesson I've learned spending 5 years living here in the Netherlands, is that that collaboration is really.
That's really fascinating, especially like in this solving the climate crisis. We all need to be kind of, even though we all have kind of conflicting interests, perhaps we all need to be working together to stop, the Earth metaphorically going under. Which, that's really interesting to consider, especially, and I want to around when you say like getting people involved, like in interested in your idea, kind of on your first point, and then also on your third point about like understanding the economics and the broader like scale of how your ideas fit in. Would you say that it's like key to that is being able to properly like convey your value proposition? So like people properly understanding not only how it fits into the economy, but as you said initially, like how it can affect an individual, how it can affect their company, their nation, if you're working internationally, and kind of developing that outreach. Is that another critical, I guess, extension there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. And I'm glad you raised it, because I think there's something that's worth making people aware of. So there's a new standard that's emerged just over the course of the past year. It's called the UN Sustainable Development Performance Indicators. And it reflects kind of a different way of approaching ESG metrics and sustainability metrics, and stepping back a little bit from kind of what's traditionally thought of, things like a carbon footprint, right? And even looking, for example, we used to measure things by whether or not an organization met a minimum wage, right? Which is just a wage that says if I could legally pay you less, I would, right? What we really should be measuring is a living wage, right? And whether or not what we're paying someone actually constitutes a decent quality of life in the part of the world that they live in. And so having those other kinds of indicators, I think, is really important. And that, you know, being aware of where you're going to be able to have communication that is contextualized and authentic is, to me, much more important than being able to pitch your idea, right? You know, we struggle with greenwashing largely because people from marketing organizations have been the ones who are tasked with communicating around sustainability. The problem is marketing was never designed to tell us about negative externalities and the thing the product doesn't do well, right? It's a whole discipline that's built around only focusing on the positive. So it's really not the right vehicle to use. But when you're working in this space, I think it's really important that you be able to pitch your solution and at the same time contextualize it, to make people very aware that you are aware of the negative externalities and you know what needs to be mitigated in addition to what needs to be moved forward. I mean, I think Mustapha made a great point about kind of the oil and gas industry, right? People want to demonize particular industries without recognizing that there's positive impact associated with that industry that needs to be maintained for a period of time as we transition away from something different, right? We might want it to go faster, and then maybe it needs to go a lot faster than we've traditionally gone. But that doesn't change the fact that we need to keep everything in context, and we need to have authentic communication around what a solution is capable of, rather than this kind of polarization that that has become much more popular in our discourse around, politics and social issues and all that kind of thing. Again, another reason I really like being in Europe, it seems like there's a little bit less of that, and I'm hoping that as we move forward, we get less and less, and we start thinking more about what we can do collectively.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Vincent, would you like to kind of give some information there?
Yeah, perhaps just to add a little bit more background, I've been in the retail and brand industry, creating many lifestyle brands in both the fashion field towards some deep tech commercialization into day-to-day life. So we have a portfolio of pretty interesting companies in that regards, and it's really to a latter date where it's much more mission driven with the awareness of the environmental impact that's been happening. I think it just comes back to what really motivates you to do it, especially for folks that are a little bit younger when you're selecting your career path. What gets you going, what drives you, because ultimately it doesn't matter whether it's a deep tech company, it's a retail company, it's going to get really difficult, and especially in a sustainability field. The second point I would make is, what is the actual impact? Because there's kind of hyping attention around this right now. Is what you're offering really truly meaningful? Do we actually need it? And there have been quite a lot of companies that we've seen over the last 5-6 years that offered a solution that's not really sustainable from a business model perspective, and it's extremely difficult, especially on an energy field. We have two companies, one spun out. We basically take cooking oils and convert those to sustainable air fuel. So we're one of the two companies that can do this right now. But as we were looking in the field, there were a lot of entrepreneurs that focus on this without realizing how difficult it is just to get through the regulators. So I think you really need to be practical and realistic when you get into this field, not to dissuade anyone, but for this to actually work and be sustainable. Don't do it for the reason that it sounds, like you want to be involved. Be very clear whether your solution is needed in the market. Otherwise, it's might not be the best time for you to get started. So for my personal kind of journey, it's been much more seeing the retail space and knowing that a lot of the eco entrepreneurs creating these products, they really have no place to showcase this. And we really wanted to create something that's special, especially in Asia, where eco products is not kind of at the top of priority right now. So we want to create the space for it and empower more of them. But the kind of advice we give to everyone that we've been in touch with, either prospective entrepreneurs coming in, creating products, or people that have already created products, to also remind them that, you know, they need to be very clear that the value proposition is there. And yes, despite the fact that, you know, there are a lot of angles to look at it, that you're doing more good on the externalities, it still needs to be sustainable from a business model perspective. And so yeah, that's my take.
Yeah, I guess like what you're saying kind of resonates with Tom's as well. One of Tom's points where maybe as an engineer or an innovator, you really kind of, you perhaps get stuck on innovating, and then you lose track of like whether it suits the market, or it has the bit like business viability, commercial viability, and all those sort of things. Mustapha, would you like to give your 3 entrepreneurial traits? Perhaps he's had to head off, which is okay. We can jump into the next question.
Okay. So we have this is interesting.
Oh, Mustapha,
James?
you with us? Yes. Hello.
You asked a question, right?
Yes. If you could give your top 3 climate entrepreneurship traits that you've found kind of have helped you along your journey, where you think are critical for innovation.
You said trends. Sorry, I didn't get that.
Entrepreneurship traits or skills.
Oh, okay. For me, the first one is adaptation. I think entrepreneur need to adapt to succeed. So, in particular in such environment. Second is a partner and have the right teams, because in general, startup fail because of lack of value added from different type of teams. So the co-foundings, most of the mistake that I saw are from co-founders, like picking the bad, I mean, not the right co-founders. And I think that's something that is very important. And 3 is also depend on the studying quite well your market. So you can't like claim to be disruptive or to bring, if you don't know very much the market, the technology deeply. That's what actually led Elon Musk to he dig very deep actually in things, and that's from where actually he pushed for innovation in what he does. So that's the 3 main item that I would share. Capital is come after. So capital for me, one lesson is capital is available. So it's available for when you have the good ingredients. So capital come to you. So that's the way I witnessed things.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Very I really see some key threads throughout, such as that capital you mentioned, and understanding your broader context and market. Moving on to our next point, perhaps you could give some context on what role do you think mentorship and peer networks play in nurturing entrepreneurship skills, and I guess what are some key, and if you believe it's incredibly necessary, how do you get started on building this network and leveraging it? Tom, if you would like to start off again.
Sure, I'm happy to start off, James. I do a lot of mentoring for young people and entrepreneurs and startups, and have been doing so for some time. And the thing that I think has benefited most of them is kind of that, I don't want to say it's just the experience of mentors, but it's the having someone who's becomes a trusted advisor to you and a sounding board, that isn't in the bubble of your company or isn't among the hyper enthusiast people that you need to get a startup going and to really, create the kind of energy that it takes to build an entrepreneurial business, right? Sometimes you hear this term of people, kind of drinking the Kool-Aid, right? It's this idea that it's an old reference, but it's an idea that everybody within a startup or an organization quite often gets so excited that they can get blinded to the risks or the challenges or the things that might create blockers. Mustapha referenced a couple of things, and I think Vincent did as well. And so, to me, one of the greatest values of mentors is that they're more objective and don't see the feedback as something that should derail you. Don't see it as criticism that's meant to, discourage you. See it as an opportunity to figure out how to make your product, your solution, your service more robust or more compelling by addressing some of these things before you get in front of a potential investor or a potential customer or someone who, if you haven't thought of it at that point, it's going to cause you a lot more harm. And so to me, the mentors, if they're doing it well, will prepare you for those kind of situations where someone's going to push back, and maybe even prepare you to deal with pushback in general, right? So someone who can think on their feet and can deal with objections in a kind of positive way and in a creative way and in a collaborative way, I think always is going to do better in a startup setting where you're going out and quite often people are shooting holes in your ideas all the time and trying to tell you why it won't work, and you need to maintain that positivity and that optimism. The other thing I think that peer networks provide that's super important is the ability to deliver complementary skill sets that you might not otherwise have access to in a way that you can afford them, right? So I'm part of an organization. There's it's called the Amsterdam Institute for Metropolitan Solutions. And it's a group of startups that all work together. And it's allied to MIT and the University of Delft. And by bringing all these startups together, you find that you've got people that have complementary skill sets that are in the same situation, that are able to support each other and bring resources to your program or your initiative that you wouldn't necessarily be able to go out into the market and buy, or you wouldn't be able to find within your internal network. So being a part of innovation labs or incubators or impact hubs or any of these other kinds of, what's cropping up in a lot of cities is impact focused startups and investors that are coalescing around, kind of what used to be just an incubator purely for tech is now an incubator for climate tech or sustainability or social impact or those kinds of things. And to me, those are super valuable networks because you're going to meet a ton of like-minded people with complementary skills that'll really be able to help you if you tap into that. And obviously, you need to bring your own willingness to help others to that in order to make sure that you're, part of a community that really helps each other thrive.
Yeah, I've never considered these accelerators as not only something where you can get funding and then that sort of thing, but that kind of that collaboration of skills and like building on top of each other in that way. It'd be interesting, especially kind of I've seen a lot of these sort of organizations within Europe and the US and Australia, and China, but I'd be really interested, perhaps like some of our participants could kind of comment in the Q&A, but on what sort of accelerators or kind of coalitions of startups they've seen in their own kind of communities or nations and networks. That'd be really interesting to hear. Vincent, would you like to build on that?
Yeah, I think Tom touched on many of the points that I very much agree with. I think one of the things that's super important is to not overthink it and just ask. People are very much willing to help and much more willing than you think they would be, even if it's someone a little bit more of a higher profile, but also be mindful of the other person's time. Make sure you thought it through, and then you get to a question point instead of just asking something very general. The more specific, the better. Secondly, I think when you determine a mentor, it's much better to find someone that's actually responsive, not someone that just, looks very good on paper, because ultimately it comes down to the attention to detail that the mentor is willing to provide you the right feedback. If the mentor is too busy, or, not willing to respond. Doesn't matter how big of a name it is. It's not really going to be super helpful from that regards. And last but not least, I think you do have to be careful with peer support and mentor and not have too many of them. I think definitely go for quality over quantity. Ultimately, your time should be spent on building the best solution or educating yourself the most in the field of subject, instead of just networking and meeting a lot of people, because that is only useful if you are building something that's meaningful and can scale. So I think it is super important to be selective with it, and also just be mindful of the other person's time, so that it's more effective on both end, that the person can actually help you and give you something useful, and at the same time, you're getting something good out of it with the right direction.
So Vincent, what would you say your opinion on accelerators is then? Because it seems that you say perhaps you should take that time to maybe develop a product a little bit more before you then, and kind of take the time to consider the network before you just jump into something. You need to be a bit more selective.
I think it really depends. There are some accelerators that are really great, and there are some that is not, it's much more on a commercial term, in a sense that some comes from big corporates. They have like this kind of mandate that on their corporate venture arm that they need to create this program, but you really need to get a feel for it. I would say definitely spend time on the intro and talk to people that have gone through the program, or try to reach out and look at successful companies that's come out of it. I think it's much more practical that way, because there are a lot of accelerators and a lot of them are great, but you got to be mindful and careful on where you're going to spend your time on it, because ultimately it takes up time. And as an entrepreneur, there's nothing more important than managing your time properly, on how much time do you want to spend on building, how much time do you want to spend on networking and participating. So I think track record on the accelerator is going to be super important. And usually they have pretty good intro sessions. You could tell one from another really quickly from kind of the objective of it. And ultimately, I think it has to be alignment in value. For instance, if the accelerator is very specific on a field, and you happen to be super interested and also have something that you think is a good fit when you graduate. So don't think about the process of the accelerator, but what's the perfect picture when you graduate on it? Is that some of the resources that can help charge your company and startup, or is this very general? So I would go for something more specific than general, and think about the outcome instead of just the process.
Yeah, indeed. Fair enough. So now we've kind of discussed the like initial ideation, finding that mentor, finding that network to really found your idea. And once this climate solution or innovative idea has been identified and developed, what strategies can youth entrepreneurs employ to scale their projects or businesses for broader impact, especially like perhaps in regions with limited infrastructure? Yeah, Tom, would you like to start us off?
Sure. I think that one of the things that is probably most beneficial is to figure out whether or not, and Vincent sort of touched on this a little bit with the incubator idea, but whether or not there are people within your community, within your ecosystem, within your region that are either already working on something similar or could benefit from it and will have an interest in helping you scale it, right? In other words, I think entrepreneurs and startups quite often think it's the idea that differentiates them, when more often than not, it's the ability to execute that differentiates them. And ability to execute quite often is a function of expertise, resources, and time to market. And if there's a large organization, whether it's a corporate, whether it's another startup, whether it's an incubator, whatever, that can give you that accelerated time to market and can give you scale and can give you resources like design, manufacturing, whatever you happen to need, I would go looking for people who you think might ultimately be a competitor, frankly, and say, what if I could figure out how to turn this relationship into something that's positive for both of us? Because that, I think, not only do we need these solutions to scale fast, we need transformations of industries to happen faster than they've traditionally happened. And one of the ways to do that is to bring new and creative ideas into big organizations and get them to operate and move in ways that are different. You see this with big tech companies now. Apologize for the background noise. To move shortly, but Google and Microsoft, for example, have billion-dollar innovation funds tied to sustainability and climate tech, right? You're likely to see the same thing with a lot of other organizations. So that's going to be really important for anybody, I think, is to figure out where can I find the resources, scale rapidly, and it's not necessarily that that organization is always going to be a competitor. Maybe that's where I need to live, or at least take this idea to market through someone that has an interest in its scale.
Yeah, I really I thought that was a fascinating point there on the on it's not the idea that differentiates you, but it's your ability to execute. I actually wrote that one down. That's very fascinating. But it really seems, yeah. So if you've got these low resource, perhaps a low resource environment, or there's not a lot of capital, or it's a hard market to break into, you really need to utilize those competitors as allies in really founding an industry. Perhaps similar to kind of touching back to on what Mustapha was talking about with Elon Musk. He seems to be a promoter of that strategy. Vincent, how about you?
Yeah, I think it's first very important for you to figure out the nature of your startup. Is it, an internet enabled solution that can be applied in the climate world, or is it something with real deep technology from university that's solving something that is, unconventional or just 10x more efficient than, conventional solutions out there. We work very closely with a lot of universities. We find innovative solutions. And one, I would say, first determine the nature of that, because it's a very different route that you're going to take. If you have very core technology and engineering solutions, then it really just comes down to, can you make this thesis into a product? And also before that happen, you need to make sure that, assuming everything goes well, is this solution that much better than what's out there in the market? Will people actually pay for it? And you can do all of this without actually building and just having conversations with industry players and whatnot. So I think, oftentimes I see certain entrepreneurs run into an issue where they're really applying a marketplace thinking or the traditional internet thinking into a big problem. But really it's very easy for any players to just adopt that, because it's a digital transformation instead of a technological transformation. So make sure you're aware of where you sit in terms of the solution. On the technical side, I think, Tom touched on it, right? Like, be sure on identifying what your weak link is, be it the manufacturing, be it market access, et cetera, et cetera. And oftentimes, as two hats that I wear, one on my own companies, the other one working for one of the largest energy group in the region, people are very willing to give trial projects, as long as it doesn't cost them much. If you have a really interesting solution that you want to try it on kind of their corporates, the best way to ask sometimes is not directly ask for a huge contract or ask for a lot of money, but ask for a trial. Most often people are pretty open-minded about it. It doesn't cost them that much. And once you have the proof of concept with an industry player, usually you can just take that and get it to scaling instead of just thinking about it. And two is also, you need to be super fast in trying and bumping into corners and turning. So it's much better if you continue to engage with the industry instead of lock yourself in a dark room and then thinking this is a really good solution, and it turns out in 8 months you could have figured out that this wasn't a really good solution very early on. So make sure to be open-minded and have as much conversation as possible. And also just don't rely on one piece of information. Usually corporates or VCs or government bodies have their own agenda and certain ways of looking at things. Doesn't mean they're right or doesn't mean they're wrong, but there could be a lot of other angles in approaching what you're actually solving. What doesn't solve the problem for one doesn't mean it's not a good solution for the other. So definitely keep an open mind. So yeah.
Yeah. It's truly fascinating. Just keeping that, as you just concluded with, keeping that open mind. And I really like the point about the trials. Once you have that precedent of an industry player like taking it up, you can then kind of go from there. Wow, I can't believe we only have 5 minutes left. I feel like it's been maybe 10 minutes since we started. But in saying that, we've got a few questions in the Q&A, and it's probably time we get to those. So we've got 2 questions. First one being, can you share a specific instance where you faced a significant setback or failure in your entrepreneurial journey, and what are the key lessons you learned from it? So Vincent, would you like to start us off?
Sure. I think the significant setback is quite normal in your journey, from even ideation phase into execution phase into scaling. Just have the expectation that things are not going to go the way you plan it to be. It could be better, it could be worse, but rarely is it kind of turns out the way you expect it to be. So in terms of significant setback, as long as your mentality is ready for that, I think it makes it much more approachable. And 2 is, it depends how you look at the setback, right? It could be just a reality check from the market. It could be bad timing. It could be bad management. So in many instances, don't look at it as a setback, but just more of a reset of your previous assumptions that could have been wrong instead of looking at it as a setback. So I think the most important thing when it comes to bumping into issues is just keep going and just knowing that there's always a way to figure this out. And yeah, just keep an open mind about it and not be so fixated and stubborn and traditionally classify as a failure or setback.
Okay. That's a very kind of open, optimistic, perhaps, way of looking at how your failures can kind of help you in moving into the future. Tom, as well, I see you might have had some connection issues, but if you're are you kind of still with us?
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we've got you.
Okay, good stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think my experience was the most significant failure that I had was just kind of great idea that I was wedded to, that I believed was going to have a massive impact, that just didn't have the support of others within the organization because it wasn't a big enough part of our revenue when I was part of a very big organization, right? So this was a great solution. Customers loved it. All the prospects loved it. It's fabulous. Again, apologies for the background noise. But it was only, 1% of the revenue of this global organization. And had I had it to do all over again, I probably would have tried to spin it out sooner. I did try to spin it out eventually, but it was kind of too late by that point. And so I would say that just be mindful of even though you might need bigger organizations and other resources and where you fit, that try to match your idea to the size of the market and the scale of what you think you can achieve, and just be realistic about that. Again, a $1 million idea is probably going to be really compelling to a $10 million company, but it won't be compelling to a $1 billion company, right? And so you need to understand what is the scale of the potential of your solution and where does it fit within the marketplace, which is something that is a hard lesson for you to do.
Okay, that's interesting. That something that's going to work for SMEs definitely is going to fly under the radar for a large multinational company. Now, well, take one. We've got two more come in, but we'll take one last one before we finish. Entrepreneurship can be stressful. How do you personally handle stress and pressure, and how do you ensure your team remains focused and motivated during challenging times? We are meant to wrap up now, but maybe if we can give maybe a 30-second kind of answer to that question. Vincent?
I think it's very important to just know that you're founder, be it your team member, so you're never alone in approaching this. So just be open to talk about kind of vulnerability when you face a lot of pressure, and just check in with yourself. Last but not least is healthy lifestyle. I think that makes a huge difference when you're stressed. So take care of your body, as obvious as that is.
Yeah, I will second that on well-being. I think your personal ability to overcome adversity has a lot to do with, you know, where you're at physically, where you're at mentally. So look after yourself first and foremost. But I would also say that it's important to, you know, to be a stoic to some extent, which really is just to focus on the things that you can actually impact and change. And if something, you know, turns out to be in your way, but it's not something that is of your own making or that you can change, sometimes it's really hard to let that go or to let that pass. But it's super important to make sure that you're only focused on the things that you can impact and things that you can change. And if it's beyond your control, you gotta let it go.
Just on mute. That's very true, and I think everyone can really, everyone should really kind of try to reflect on how they can incorporate that into their lives. But okay, so that wraps up our panel, and not only this panel, but this is the last panel of the series. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Vincent. Thank you, Tom. And thank you to Mustapha, even though he's not here. Thank you for being here for our climate entrepreneurship innovation panel, the last one. And thank you to everyone in the audience who has kind of come along to all the panels in the series. I hope it's been impactful for you. So normally this is where I say our next panel is coming up, but it's not. So have a good rest of your year, everyone. I hope you can go away and make some plans for the new year to implement some new climate innovations.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks,
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Vincent.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, James. Bye.
See you.
Bye-bye.